What's going on, guys? My name is Wade with Tech Daily. So I've had the Samsung Galaxy M31 for a few weeks now, and unlike a vast majority of other YouTubers who have this phone who are primarily based in India or Asia, I'm probably one of the few people here in the US who have had the chance to experience this device firsthand so far. And after using the M31 now for a while, the thing that strikes me the most about this phone is just how well it would do here in the US. It's an awesome phone, and it's probably the best overall value, the best bang for your buck device that's out right now. And it's gonna do really well this year in the international market. But folks in the US probably won't get to experience this hidden gem at all, and that's a shame. Now, here in the States, Samsung does offer a solid array of budget phones with their A-series lineup. The new A51 and A71 are great, for example, and we'll probably get a few more budget A-series phones later this year. But in my opinion, the M31 is just a better deal. It packs just about everything the A-series phones have, and even a little more, actually, all for less than half the price. So in this video, I'm going to talk about my experience with this phone over the last couple of weeks and why I do think it is such a good device. And I'm also going to explain its limitations here in the US. It's not totally unusable, but there are some drawbacks with network support that's worth noting. In regards to the design and the form factor, this is a phone that honestly isn't the most attractive thing in the world, but that's okay. Yes, you do get last year's design with the teardrop notch and thick bezels all around, with a chunky bottom chin, which all in all doesn't really scream 2020 smartphone. But you're still getting a 6.4-inch display housed in a body that overall at least attempts to minimize the distractions and maximize that usability. It doesn't look as nice or as modern as an A-series or S-series phone, of course, but it's something I can still live with. And honestly, nitpicking about the design is probably the only real complaint I have about this phone anyway. It's still a budget device after all, and you need to keep those expectations in check. And while it is an all-plastic phone, the materials Samsung chose, that sort of shiny, glossy, thick, hard plastic that frames the whole thing, it all still feels pretty high quality. And I think that's important because this is a chunky phone. It's fairly big and noticeably thicker in the hand due to its massive battery. So you couldn't really have an immense amount of cheap plastic covering this thing. Overall, the design I think still goes a little beyond the price point, even if it is a bit dated now and you are getting less than premium materials. But this isn't a phone that feels as though you only paid $250 for it. One thing that Samsung gets right with its mid-range and budget smartphones in particular is how they don't compromise on anything. Taking a look around, you'll notice that this is a phone that doesn't really lack anything at all. You've got dual SIM support and expandable storage via micro SD card, so you aren't limited by the 64GB built-in storage. Down below, there's the good old headphone jack along with USB-C for charging, and around back, Samsung decided to stick with the physical rear-mounted fingerprint sensor. This is something I really like because not only is it easy to find and feel for, but it's fast and accurate, and it works 100% of the time. With some of the in-display fingerprint readers I've experienced, especially on the new A-series phones, they sometimes just miss the mark. More often than not, my phone is already unlocked via facial recognition anyway by the time I pick it up, but still, having the classic fingerprint sensor is a benefit and certainly not a drawback in any way. The 6.4-inch display on the M31 I think is probably the most striking thing about this phone when you first see it in person. It's a Super AMOLED panel with a 2340 by 1080 resolution that packs about 403 pixels per inch. Sure, it's not pushing the limits on specs or screen technology, obviously, but this is a display that looks good from every angle, and it focuses on the important stuff. It's plenty bright, even outside. It's bold and colorful without being overdone, and while it is just a 1080p display, it's a crisp and sharp-looking screen that offers a viewing experience, which, again, is something you might not expect from a phone at this price point. Keep in mind that Samsung's more expensive A-series phones, like the A71, all have the same 1080 resolution AMOLED panel, which is really surprising. And it sort of begs the question whether Samsung offered more going with the display on a phone like this, or maybe sort of cheaped out on their higher-end mid-range devices. Either way you look at it though, the viewing experience here is probably one of the best features this phone has to offer. The other standout feature, of course, with the M31 is the battery life. Now, the specs are one thing. This phone packs a massive 6,000 milliamp capacity battery inside, which is also why it's a little thicker. We've seen phones with big batteries before, but because of the combination of screen choice and internal specs and better optimized software, this is a phone that I think makes the most of that huge battery capacity. The M31 has lasted me more than 2 days on a single charge through normal use. Web browsing, social media apps, texting, a couple of games here and there. If you aren't a super heavy user, this is a phone that realistically you won't really have to worry about battery life. And here in the US at least, I don't know of any other phone, budget or flagship, that has a battery life that can compete with this thing. And yes, while the 15-watt fast charger isn't the super fast upgrade that many Samsung phones are getting nowadays, I really never found myself trying to juice this thing up in a pinch because I needed to. Battery life was just not a concern. Inside, this phone is powered by the Exynos 9611 chipset, Mali G72 GPU, and 6 gigs of RAM. Now, I have to be honest, given the inconsistencies of Samsung's processors, particularly in their flagship phones when compared with Qualcomm, I was sort of skeptical. But the 9611 I think is probably the best Exynos processor overall right now, and fortunately you can find it in a lot of other devices too, not just the M31. It's a great combination of power and optimization, which pretty much says it all. Paired with the Android 10 update and One UI 2, I found this phone to be snappy and fluid while remaining fully capable as I even started to push it a bit more. Gaming is totally fine. You can bump up the settings in graphics heavy games too, and in my experience, I found very few hiccups or app crashes. The 6 gigs of RAM is also plenty. And just as a side note, one thing I like to gauge with these phones is their long-term usability potential. And I have to say, I think with everything offered here, this is a phone that's a solid 2 to 3 year investment, which says a lot coming from a mid-range or budget device. It's just simply not the case with a lot of other phones at this price point. In regards to the camera setup, I feel like I've made almost too many camera comparison videos now at this point that feature this phone up against countless others. So if you want to see a ton of real-world samples, feel free to check out all of those videos. But I'll say this, the M31's quad camera setup is fantastic. The 64 megapixel main shooter, especially when utilizing all of those megapixels, captures a ton of detail, and it takes a great shot in really any condition. The ultra wide angle lens isn't the best, it goes a bit dark at times, and the macro lens isn't something I found very useful. But overall, for a $250 phone, the picture and video capabilities here are absolutely fantastic. And I think it's another thing that sets this phone apart from most other devices. So let's touch on some of the limitations you might face if you're trying to get this phone to work here in the US. First off, unless you purchase from some third-party company or other individual who set up this phone specifically for use in the States, the M31 imported from India or Asia will be region locked. You'll need a region-specific SIM card and about 5 minutes of voice calling to break that region lock. It's not a huge deal if you know what you're doing, but it is an inconvenience nonetheless. I was fortunate enough to get this device from someone who already unlocked it, so I didn't have to go through those steps. But the other thing you need to consider is what network you want to use the M31 on. Different networks use various 2G, 3G, and 4G wireless bands, and they aren't all supported with this phone. For example, you won't get LTE on AT&T, but you might get it on Straight Talk. Most GSM carriers here will at least have 2G, 2.5G, and some 3G speeds. So if you can live with that and mostly rely on Wi-Fi otherwise when you're at home, at school, or at the office, then realistically it's not a huge deal, but I realize it sort of defeats the purpose here, which is why I think these network limitations for this phone in the US are probably the main reason why most people won't even bother with this phone. It's such a bummer too, because everything else is great, but unfortunately I just don't see any other means of getting this phone to play friendly with all US bands and carriers. A couple last things to mention. No, this phone does not have wireless charging, but I don't care. No, this phone doesn't have any waterproofing or IP rating. And while I do care about that, really no phones at this price point, not even the A71, which is even more expensive, have waterproofing. And that's mainly because of the cheaper plastic build. And no, the M31 doesn't have the greatest external speaker in the world, but it's usable and good enough. And you can just plug in a nice pair of wired headphones. You have that option anyway. Here's the bottom line. For the rest of the world, India, Asia, and wherever else this phone is fully supported and sold, congratulations, you get to have an amazing device. Seriously, you should buy this phone. You won't be disappointed. It's an incredible value with next to no compromises, and I'm super jealous you guys get to have it. For us here in the States, if you want the M31, there are ways to get it and use it almost to its fullest potential, but for a lot of people, it's probably more trouble than it's worth. And that sucks because I think the M series line is better than the A series line, at least value-wise. And this phone would do amazing here in the US. I'm glad I got the chance to use it, and I know a lot of people are gonna love this phone. I can't recommend it enough overall, and I am excited to see what other M series phones Samsung launches later this year. So there you go. That's everything you need to know about the M31. What do you guys think? Is this the phone for you? Let me know down in the comments below. I'd love to know your thoughts, of course. But hopefully you guys did enjoy this video. Be sure to follow Tech Daily on Twitter and subscribe to the Tech Daily YouTube channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys later.